5 days after my divorce was finalized, my mother-in-law stood in the doorway of what she clearly believed was now, by some logic known only to her, hers, and asked me, with that particular tilt of her carefully powdered chin and that smile that had never once, in 6 years, reached her eyes, why I hadn't moved out yet. The question was delivered with the precise, practiced casualness of someone who had rehearsed it in front of a mirror, someone who had chosen the exact moment. Early morning, the house quiet, me still in my robe, coffee mug warm in my hands, for maximum psychological effect. I set the mug down on the counter with a soft, deliberate click. I looked at her, and then I smiled back. "Because I paid for this house with my own money, Eleanor," I said. My voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. The kind of quiet that doesn't shrink from anything, the kind that fills a room completely, like water filling a vessel. Every single cent of it, every brick, every beam, every curtain rod, mine. The color drained from her face in stages. Not all at once, but slowly, the way a tide pulls back from shore, and leaves expose the pale, colorless sand underneath. Her mouth opened, then it closed. Her sharp blue eyes, those eyes that had spent 6 years cataloging my every flaw and softness and point of entry, went very wide, and then, very deliberately, flat. She had not expected this. In 6 years of being her son's wife, I had never once said anything remotely like this to her. I had absorbed every slight, every veiled insult, every territorial maneuver, and I had bent and apologized and kept the peace, and smiled my own carefully constructed smile right back at hers. She had built an entire architecture of assumptions around my compliance, and in the space of one quiet sentence, standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning with the smell of coffee still warm in the air, I had demolished the foundation of all of it. What she didn't yet understand, what she was only beginning to sense in that moment, the way an animal senses a shift in pressure before a storm, was that I had been preparing for this conversation for a very long time, longer than she knew. Longer than even I had fully admitted to myself, until the night the papers were signed and I sat alone at my kitchen table and felt, underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the strange hollow quiet of a life coming apart at its seams, something else entirely, something that felt, in its own strange way, like relief. The house on Wren Street had been mine before it was ever ours. I need to be precise about that because precision matters here. It matters legally, and it matters in the telling of this story. And it matters because Eleanor spent years working very hard to blur that precision, to soften the edges of that fact until it became negotiable, until it became, in her version of events, a charming little detail that no one needed to take too seriously. But I have always been a person who takes facts seriously. It is, among other things, what made me a good architect. I had worked for 8 years at Harmon and Vale Design before Jason and I were married. 8 years of 70-hour weeks, of driving 3 hours each way to client sites, of eating lunch at my drafting table and answering emails at midnight and turning down every vacation my mother suggested because there was always another project. Always another deadline, always another reason to stay. I was not by nature a workaholic. I was a person who had a specific goal and who understood that reaching it required a specific kind of focus. The goal was simple. I wanted to buy a house, not a starter home, not a rental investment, a house. The house. The kind of house I had sketched in the margins of my notebooks since I was 9 years old. The kind with a wide front porch and tall windows and a garden that needed actual tending, not just occasional watering. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Nana Ruth, who smelled of lavender and talcum powder and made the best rye bread I have ever tasted in my life, left me $60,000 when she died, 3 months before I turned 28. It was every penny she had saved over 40 years of working as a seamstress, folded carefully into a trust that became mine on her death, along with a handwritten note that said, "Use this for something that lasts. Clara Bird." Something with roots. I kept that note. It is in a small cedar box in the drawer of my bedside table, and it was there throughout my marriage, and it is there still. I read it sometimes, on the mornings when I need to remember who I am. I combined Nana Ruth's $60,000 with the savings I had accumulated over 8 years of disciplined, deliberate living. No vacations, no new car, a studio apartment that my college friends had found quaint and my work colleagues had found depressing. And I made a down payment on the house on Wren Street 6 months before I met Jason Graves at a mutual friend's dinner party. The mortgage was in my name. The deed was in my name. The inspection reports, the insurance documents, the utility accounts, all mine. I had been living in the house for 6 months, had already stripped and refinished the hardwood floors in the entryway, and repainted the kitchen the exact shade of sage green I had imagined for years when Jason and I went on our first date. He was charming then. I want to be fair about that. He was tall and warm-voiced, and he laughed easily, and he asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers, and he brought very good wine to the second date and remembered that I had mentioned, in passing, that I preferred reds. He was attentive in the particular way that some men are attentive when they are trying to impress someone, and I was, in those early months, fairly thoroughly impressed. He met my father on a Sunday afternoon in October, and they talked about old movies for 3 hours at the kitchen table. He told me I was the most competent person he had ever met, and at the time I heard that as a compliment. I know better now. We dated for 2 years, and then we married in May, in the garden behind the house on Wren Street, with 30 friends and my father weeping quietly in the front row, and my best friend Dana reading a poem she had written herself. It was a beautiful day. I have photographs of it that I have not yet decided what to do with. I meet that version of myself sometimes in those photographs. 30-year-old Clara in her grandmother's pearls, standing in her own garden on a perfect May afternoon, and I try to be gentle with her. She did not know what she was walking into. She was doing what people do when they believe they have found something real. I had met Eleanor Graves, Jason's mother, 3 times before the wedding. Each meeting had been brief, each one conducted at a restaurant Eleanor had chosen, and each one had left me with a faint, unlocatable discomfort. The kind you can't quite point to, the kind your rational mind overrules with a list of reasonable explanations. She was a striking woman, 60 at the time, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in the specific way of women who have always cared deeply about being seen as put together. She wore perfume that was expensive and slightly overwhelming, something floral and heavy, the kind that lingers on upholstery for hours after a person leaves a room. She had a way of tilting her head when she listened to you that suggested deep interest and conveyed, somehow, something else entirely. She called me sweetheart from the very first meeting, in a tone that was warm on the surface and beneath it, very slightly sharp. "She's just traditional," Jason explained, when I mentioned after the first dinner that I had found her a little cold. "She takes time to warm up to people. She was the same with my college girlfriend. By the end, they were like family." He said it easily, reassuringly, and I accepted it, because I was in love and because I wanted it to be true, and because the alternative, that the woman who would become my mother-in-law was not cold but calculating, was not something I was ready to sit with yet. What I noticed in those early dinners was the way Eleanor asked about the house, not in the way people ask about a new home, enthusiastically, warmly, asking about the garden or the neighbors or whether the kitchen was big enough. She asked in the way of someone conducting a quiet assessment. How many square feet? What neighborhood exactly? How long had I owned it? And then casually, as if the question were an afterthought, "And it's just in your name still? Even though you and Jason have been together so long?" I had said yes, and she had nodded slowly and moved on to discussing the menu. But I noticed. I filed it away in a drawer in my mind and told myself it meant nothing. It would turn out to mean everything. Jason moved into the house on Wren Street in the summer before we married, 8 months after we began dating. He came with 2 large suitcases, a set of vinyl records he was very particular about, and an easy, grateful manner that made the whole thing feel simple. He cooked dinner on his first night there. Pasta with a sauce that took 2 hours and was genuinely excellent. And we ate on the porch as the sun went down over the neighbors' oak trees. And I thought, this is it. This is what the house was always waiting for. I think about that evening now and I see things I could not see then. The way he walked through the rooms that first afternoon, slowly, quietly, touching the door frames and window sills with a particular kind of attention. I had thought he was admiring it. I understand now that he was also, in some way that was perhaps not even fully conscious, measuring it, appraising it, seeing it not just as my home or our future home, but as a thing of value. The first 18 months of our marriage were genuinely happy. I want to say that clearly because it is true, and because I think it matters, not for Eleanor's sake and not for Jason's, but for mine. The happiness was real, even if what came after it was not. We had routines that I loved, Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper and the kitchen radio playing something soft, Friday evenings when we walked to the Thai place 3 blocks over and split a bottle of white wine, the annual tradition of repainting one room together, which always devolved into laughter and paint-splattered arguments about color choices that ended in compromise. We had a good life. It was a small life in the best sense of that word. Contained, warm, tended. Eleanor came to dinner once a month. Those evenings had a specific texture to them. She would arrive with flowers, always exactly the wrong kind, the stiff, formal ones that looked like they belonged in a hospital waiting room, never the loose garden flowers I actually loved. And she would move through the house with that careful attention that I had noticed on the first tour and had never quite stopped noticing. She would compliment things in a way that felt like inventory taking. "Oh, that's a lovely piece. Is that new?" Or, "Those curtains. They must have cost a fortune, Clara." She never helped in the kitchen. She directed things from the living room, raising her voice to ask Jason questions that I was clearly meant to overhear. Questions about his work and his health, and whether he was getting enough sleep. Questions that all carried below their surface a single persistent message. I am watching him. He is mine. Don't forget that. In the second year of our marriage, she began to comment on the house more specifically. Had I thought about adding a second bathroom? Was the roof recently inspected? Did I know that property values in this area tended to plateau after 5 years? The comments were delivered lightly in the tone of casual curiosity, but they arrived in clusters, 3 or 4 in an evening, and they always circled back to the same territory, the house, its value, its ownership, its future. One evening, after she left, I mentioned to Jason that I found her questions about the house a little odd. He shrugged. "She's just interested," he said. "She grew up poor. Real estate means security to her." He said it with the patient, practiced tone of someone reciting an explanation they have given many times, and I accepted it, again, and went to bed. I accepted things too many times, for too long. That is my part in this story, and I own it. The first real warning came in the 3rd year of our marriage, on a Wednesday evening in November, when Eleanor arrived for dinner unannounced. I was working late at the kitchen table, blueprints spread across the surface, my laptop open to a 3D rendering program. The dinner I had planned abandoned in favor of takeout containers from the Thai place, when I heard the front door open. Not a knock, not a ring of the doorbell. The door simply opened, the way a door opens when someone has a key. I sat very still for a moment, my pencil suspended above the paper, listening. Then Eleanor's voice from the entryway. Jason, are you home?" I walked out of the kitchen slowly. Eleanor was standing in the entry hall in her coat and scarf, looking around the room with that appraising expression she always wore here, the one that slid off her face the moment she saw me and was replaced with the smile. "Clara, sweetheart, I hope I'm not interrupting. I was just in the neighborhood and I thought I'd stop in." I looked at the door, which she had closed behind her. "How did you get in?" I asked. She tilted her head as if the question surprised her. "Jason gave me a key months ago, in case of emergencies, you know. Didn't he mention it?" She said it so naturally, so simply, that for a moment I almost let it pass. Then, "No," I said, "he didn't." Her smile stayed exactly in place. "I'm sure it just slipped his mind, sweetheart. You know how he is." Jason came downstairs 10 minutes later. He saw his mother in the living room, and then he saw my face, and he did the thing I would come to recognize as his defining characteristic. He went very slightly still, the way a person goes still when they realize two forces are about to collide and they are standing precisely between them. "Mom," he said carefully, "I didn't know you were stopping by." "I was in the neighborhood," she said serenely. He looked at me. I looked at him. "You gave her a key," I said. Not a question. He was quiet for a moment too long, and in that moment, in that small, specific silence, something shifted between us. Something cracked, fine as a hairline fracture, but there. "I meant to mention it," he said finally. "It was just for emergencies." "This isn't an emergency," I said quietly. He said nothing. He looked at the floor. His mother looked at me with that smile, and her eyes, above the smile, were perfectly steady. I told him that night, after she left, that I wanted my own house key back. He argued, not aggressively, but with that particular exhausted reasonableness that was his way of resisting, and eventually said he would talk to her. He did not talk to her. 3 weeks later, I changed the front door lock. Eleanor never commented on it directly, but the next time she visited, she was 20 minutes late, and I saw the expression that crossed her face when she had to ring the bell and wait. It was the first move I made consciously, and it cost me 6 months of barely disguised frost. The warnings came more frequently after that, though I still did not know that what I was witnessing was not a difficult woman's personality, but a deliberate campaign with a timeline and a plan. In the 4th year of our marriage, Eleanor began visiting more often, sometimes twice a week, always when Jason was home, always for a duration that stretched a little longer each time. She began to make comments about the house that were subtly different from before, less curious, more proprietary. "Those cabinets really ought to be replaced, Jason. Not Clara. Always Jason. The back fence is rotting. Someone should see to it. You know, if you ever decided to put in a proper study upstairs, the view from that north window would be magnificent." The house, in her language, had quietly changed ownership, had become, in her speech, a place that Jason inhabited rather than a place that Clara had built. I noticed every single time, the way you notice a stone in your shoe that isn't quite big enough to stop you walking but is always there, always reminding you of itself. I mentioned it to Jason twice. The first time, he said I was reading too much into the way she phrased things. His mother was just old-fashioned. She didn't mean anything by it. The second time, he was quiet for longer, and then he said, in a careful, measured voice, that I needed to understand his mother's background. She had come from very little, Real estate was emotional for her. I shouldn't take it personally. Both times I let it go. Both times he changed the subject with practiced ease, and I let him because I still believed at that point that our marriage was the most important thing in the room. The stone in my shoe became a bruise. The bruise became something I stopped being able to ignore. In the 5th year of our marriage, Jason and I began to argue. Not the easy, resolvable arguments we'd had before, about dinner plans and vacation preferences and who had forgotten to pay the electric bill, but longer, harder, grinding arguments that always seemed to circle eventually back to the same place. I was working longer hours. A major project had come through the firm, a community arts center on the east side of the city, and I was the lead designer, which meant I was living for 8 months at a particular intersection of exhaustion and exhilaration that left very little room for anything else. Jason had always been supportive of my career in the abstract. In practice, he found the reality of it. The late nights, the canceled dinners, the weekends when I worked, harder to manage than he had expected. Eleanor, I noted, visited more during those months. She was always there on the evenings I worked late, always installed on my sofa with her tea when I came home at 9:30, tired to my bones. She would rise when I entered, all gracious concern. "Oh, Clara, you look exhausted. You really do push yourself too hard." And she and Jason would be watching something together or eating something she had cooked, and the intimacy of it, the settled comfort of it, would hit me like a small, specific cruelty every single time. She was not replacing me. That would have been too crude. She was simply making herself more present in the space I was absent from. She was patient. She was, I came to understand, extraordinarily patient. She had been waiting, with the focused patience of someone who knows exactly where they are going, for years. The argument that finally cracked everything open happened on a Sunday afternoon in October of our 5th year, 6 months before the divorce. I had come home from a client site at noon, tired but in good spirits. The project was going well, better than expected, and I had stopped for pastries at the bakery on the corner, the good ones with the almond cream that Jason loved. I came through the front door with the bakery bag in one hand and my keys in the other, and I heard voices in the study. The door was pulled to, but not closed. I heard Eleanor's voice, then Jason's, then Eleanor again. Low and urgent, in a register I had not heard from her before, stripped of the warmth she typically performed. I stood in the hallway and I listened. Doesn't have to be complicated. It just needs to be done before anything changes. A refinancing would be the cleanest way. Both your names on the mortgage. That was Eleanor, and her voice was the voice of a woman reading from a prepared document. She'd never agree to that, Mom. Jason's voice was quiet, unhappy, but not, I noticed with a cold, precise attention, shocked. He did not sound like a man hearing something new. He sounded like a man who had been having a version of this conversation for a long time and had not yet found a way to end it. She doesn't have to agree to the refinancing initially. She has to agree to adding you to the deed. You've been married 5 years. If you frame it as estate planning, she'll... Mom. His voice was sharper now. I said I'd think about it. You've been thinking about it for 2 years, Jason. There was a pause. This house is worth $400,000. When she bought it, it was worth $240,000. That appreciation. Half of that should be protected for this family. Another pause. Our family, she added, and in the way she said those 2 words, I heard everything she had never said directly to me in 5 years of Sunday dinners and floral arrangements and powder-scented evenings. You are not our family. This house is. I stood in the hallway and I held the bakery bag and I felt the floor tilt very slightly under my feet, the way a floor tilts when you realize something you already knew, but had never let yourself fully know. I did not go into the study. I did not say a word. I turned around very quietly. I set the bakery bag on the entryway table, and I walked upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in our room. And I looked at the window and the afternoon light coming through it, and I thought, with a clarity so pure, it almost didn't feel like my own thought. It has been a plan all along. I sat there for 40 minutes. Then I went back downstairs and I made tea. And when Eleanor came into the kitchen, I smiled at her. And she smiled back, and we had the kind of conversation we always had. Pleasant, precise, careful. And Jason stood at the counter with that particular look on his face, the one I now recognized as the look of a man managing the space between two forces he did not know how to resolve. After Eleanor left, he asked if I was all right. I told him I had a headache. He said he was sorry. I told him to go to bed first and that I'd be up soon. Then I sat at the kitchen table in my house, and I began, very quietly, to build my own plan. The next 2 months were the strangest of my life. I have heard people describe the period of quiet that precedes a major decision as a kind of numbness, and I understand that description, but it wasn't what I experienced. What I experienced was the opposite of numbness, a heightened, hyper-specific awareness of everything around me, the sounds of the house, the particular creak of the third step on the stairs, the knock of the old radiator pipes in the early morning cold, the sound the front door made when it settled back into its frame, had never seemed so vivid, so present, so mine. I moved through my own rooms with a new attentiveness, noticing details I had stopped noticing years ago. The grain of the kitchen floorboards, the particular way the afternoon light fell through the living room windows in October, the smell of the garden in the morning, damp and earthy and green. I was cataloging it, not consciously, not at first, but later I understood that this was what I was doing. I was reminding myself at a cellular level of what I had built and what I had every right to protect. I called Dana in the first week of November. Dana Okafor had been my best friend since the second year of university, when we were assigned adjacent studio spaces in the architecture department, and she had leaned across the divider and said, of the model I was building, "That proportioning is off and you know it, so why haven't you fixed it?" And I had laughed, because she was right and because her directness was exactly the thing I needed in my life. Dana had gone on to get a law degree after her architecture degree, which she described as a backup plan that took over. She practiced family law now with a small firm in the city, and she was, among other things, very good at it. When I called her that November evening, she listened to everything I told her. The conversation I had overheard, the key Eleanor had been given, the gradual semantic takeover of the house in her language, the 5 years of Eleanor's Sunday dinners and their particular flavor. And she was quiet for a long moment before she said, "Clara, you know what you need to do, right?" "I need a divorce," I said. I had known it since October. Saying it out loud to Dana was the first time I had permitted myself to know it fully. "That too," Dana said. "But before that, you need to do 3 things." She told me what they were. I wrote them down on a notepad I hid in my desk at work the next morning. The handwriting was very neat. My hands were not shaking. The first thing was to pull every document related to the house and have copies made and kept outside the house. The deed, the original purchase agreement, the mortgage documents, the title insurance, all of it. Dana walked me through each document and its significance, and by the end of 2 hours on the phone, I understood, better than I ever had, exactly what I owned and exactly what no one could take from me. The mortgage was in my name only. Jason's income had never been added to it at his own request in the early years of our marriage because he had some credit issues he'd been sorting out. The deed was sole ownership. There was no cohabitant claim under our state's law after 5 years of marriage, though there could be arguments about marital contribution to property value under divorce settlement, which was a different matter and one Dana knew how to handle. "The house is yours," she said. "It has always been yours. Make sure everything is documented and that documentation is somewhere safe." The second thing was to hire a forensic accountant. I did not fully understand why until Dana explained it, and when she explained it, something cold moved through me. If Eleanor and Jason had been discussing adding him to the deed as an estate planning measure, it was possible they had already taken other preparatory steps that might include documentation I was not aware of, financial accounts I had not been monitoring closely enough, movements of money that would be relevant in a divorce proceeding. "People get sloppy," Dana said, "or they don't think the other person is paying attention." She did not say your husband explicitly, but she did not need to. The third thing was the most painful. I needed to give nothing away, to continue for as long as necessary, as if I did not know what I knew, to keep Sunday dinners with Eleanor and Friday evenings at the Thai place and the comfortable surface of a marriage that had, beneath its surface, already ended. I was good at this part. I had been practicing, without knowing it, for years. I found the document by accident, as the most important discoveries so often are. It was a Saturday morning in December, 6 weeks after my conversation with Dana. Jason had gone to his gym early, something he had begun doing regularly, leaving the house by 7 and not returning until noon, the shape of his day shifting in ways I was cataloging alongside everything else. I was at his desk in the study looking for a stapler. We shared the study. This was not an intrusion. His laptop was open, not sleeping, a browser window visible. I would have passed it without looking if the tab at the top of the screen had not read, in small, clear text, "Reversion Draft Wave 3, Wren Street." I sat down slowly. The chair made its familiar slight squeak. Outside, the garden was quiet, frost pale and silver in the December morning light. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. I put my hand on the mouse and I opened the document. It was 4 pages. I read every word of all 4 of them. It was a draft agreement, clearly not a final document, clearly assembled from template language with specific details inserted, that described a financial arrangement between Jason Graves and Clara Graves, née Whitmore, dated 18 months earlier. The arrangement, as described in the document, was this: that the $60,000 used as the down payment on the house at Wren Street had in fact been a loan from Jason's family trust. Not my grandmother's inheritance, not my savings, but a loan. And that the terms of this loan entitled Jason to a 50% equity stake in the property in the event of dissolution of marriage. At the bottom of page 4 there was a signature line. Jason's name was printed below it, and below his name, in a slightly different ink, in handwriting that I recognized, that I had seen on birthday cards and Christmas notes and grocery lists on the refrigerator for 6 years, was a line for my signature. It was blank, but the document's header noted, in small text at the top of each page, "Notarized copy to follow upon final execution." My hands were on my knees. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. The room was very still. The clock, the frostlight, the silence of a house that was mine. And I sat in the middle of it, and I understood, with perfect clarity, the shape of what had been planned. Not improvised, not reactive, planned. Eleanor Graves had spent 6 years working toward this moment. She had watched me build this house into something of value, and she had watched the marriage she had always considered provisional, and she had drawn up, or arranged to have drawn up, a document that would retroactively rewrite the financial history of my home, a document that would transform my grandmother's legacy into Jason's family loan, that would turn $60,000 of Nana Ruth's 40 years of seamstress savings into collateral for a claim against my own property. She had done this 18 months before the marriage ended. She had been ready. I photographed every page with my phone. I turned the screen back to exactly where it had been. I picked up the stapler, I went back to the kitchen, and I made myself a second cup of coffee, and I stood at the window, and I looked at the garden, and I waited for my hands to stop trembling. It took 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Then I called Dana. She forged it, Dana said after I had sent her the photographs, and she had spent 20 minutes with them. Or had it forged? The document is dated 18 months ago, but the metadata on the file shows it was created 8 weeks ago. There was a pause. She made a mistake. She made a mistake, I repeated. My voice was flat and even. The bigger issue, Dana continued, is that your signature line is blank. They were planning to present this to you at some point, during divorce proceedings, most likely, or possibly before, to pressure you into signing. Either way, they need your signature to make it work, and they don't have it. She paused again. Jason knows about this. Yes, I said, he does. Another pause. Clara, I know, I said. I know. I did know. I had known, in some way, since October. Since the hallway outside the study where I had stood with the bakery bag and heard Eleanor's voice stripped of its warmth. I had known that the silence Jason kept was not the silence of a man who didn't know. It was the silence of a man who knew and could not figure out how to stop it, and had, at some point, stopped trying. His mother had been building this plan for years, with his knowledge, with his participation in whatever degree, and his compliance, his evasion, his practiced unawareness had been, in its own quiet way, a form of consent. He was not the architect. He was not Eleanor. But he was not innocent. I spent the following week collecting everything. I was systematic about it, the way I am systematic about things that matter, methodically, without rush, without drama. Dana had referred me to a forensic accountant named Patrick Hale, who spent 3 days reviewing our joint accounts and emerged with a list of small but significant irregularities, withdrawals in round numbers, repeated transfers to an account I didn't recognize that turned out to be held in Jason's name at a bank I had never heard of. None of the amounts were catastrophic. The total over 18 months was just under $14,000, small enough to remain unnoticed in the ordinary flow of two incomes, large enough to matter. He was building a separate fund, Patrick told me, in the flat, factual tone of someone who has seen this many times and has learned not to editorialize. It looks like it was gradual, 200-300 at a time. I thanked him. I added his report to the folder Dana was building. I filed for divorce in the first week of January. Jason's face, when I told him, was a complicated thing to watch. There was surprise, which I had expected. There was something else, too. Something that I think, if I am being entirely honest, was also relief. He had been living inside the structure of his mother's plan for long enough that he had forgotten what it felt like to make a decision of his own. The divorce gave him one, in the only direction available. He moved out within the week. Eleanor, remarkably, did not call me for the entire month of January or February. She called Jason constantly. I knew this because I could hear his side of the conversations when he came to collect the last of his things, could hear the way his voice went careful and flat whenever he answered her calls in my presence, the way he turned slightly away from me, as if the angle of his body could create privacy where there was none. She was planning. I knew she was planning. I had spent enough time understanding how she operated to know that her silence was not retreat. It was the pause before the next move. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in March. Jason and I met at Dana's office to sign the final documents, which included a property settlement that Dana had constructed with the precision of an architect herself. The house remained in my sole ownership. The documentation of my grandmother's inheritance and my pre-marriage purchase made the property claim airtight. The separate account Patrick had found was addressed as marital asset concealment and factored into the settlement. Jason signed everything without contest. He looked, throughout the process, like a man who was very tired and had been for a long time. As I watched him sign his name at the bottom of the last page, I felt something unexpected move through me. Not satisfaction, not victory, but a complicated, muted grief for the version of him I had married, who had eaten pasta in the garden on his first evening in my house and laughed at something I said and filled the space beside me with warmth. That person had existed. He had also, over 6 years, made choices that meant he could not stay. Both things were true. I drove home alone in the evening light, with the signed documents in the folder on the passenger seat and the radio playing something I did not listen to. And when I turned onto Wren Street and saw my house, its wide porch and its tall windows, and its garden coming back to life in the early March cold, I felt, underneath everything else, the thing I had felt in the hallway the night I heard Eleanor's voice. Clarity. Mine. 5 days later, Eleanor knocked on my door at 7:30 in the morning. She did not knock, actually. She rang the bell. She had rung it since the morning I changed the lock 2 years ago, and she had never once commented on it, but every ring contained, I always felt, a small, deliberate assertion. I heard the bell from the kitchen, and I did not move immediately. I stood at the counter, and I looked at my coffee mug, and I thought about what Dana had told me the week before. She will come. She is not done. Be ready. I was ready. I opened the door. Eleanor was on the porch in her good gray coat, her silver hair precise, her face arranged in the expression she wore when she wanted to appear reasonable. The lips soft, the eyes warm, the chin slightly forward. She looked past me briefly at the entryway, then at me. "Clara, sweetheart, I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," I said. "Come in." I stepped back. She walked in, and I noticed the way her eyes moved through the entry hall quickly, professionally, the way they always moved through this space, cataloging, assessing. "I thought it was time we talked," she said, following me to the kitchen. "I think there are things that need to be sorted out." She sat down at the kitchen table without being invited to. I poured myself a second cup of coffee. I did not offer her any. "Yes," I said. "I agree." She tilted her head. She had not expected that. She had expected me to be uncertain, defensive. The Clara she had always managed, the one who bent. "The house," she said, smoothing her coat over her lap. "It's difficult, isn't it? With everything that's happened, I'm sure you've been thinking about your next steps." "I have," I said. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I looked at her directly. I had decided the night before that I was done with the particular kind of looking I had been doing for 6 years. The looking that always searched first for a way to make things comfortable, that always gave her the benefit of a doubt I had long since run out of. I was going to look at her the way I would look at a document, clearly without wanting it to say something different than what it said. "I imagine," she continued, "that maintaining a house of this size on your own might be challenging. Financially, I mean, and emotionally. This house has a lot of memories in it, and sometimes it's easier to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere that isn't so—" "Eleanor," I said. She stopped. It was the first time I had interrupted her. Ever. In 6 years. "Why haven't you moved out yet?" I said, in her own phrasing, back to her. "That's what you came to ask me, isn't it?" The color shifted in her face. Not yet the full retreat of color. That came later. But the first small change, a faint tightening around the eyes. "I'm asking as family," she said, and her voice was very controlled. "I'm worried about you. This is a lot of house for one person. It's my house, I said. I bought it before I met your son, with my grandmother's inheritance and 8 years of my own savings, every cent of it. The deed has my name on it. The mortgage has my name on it. It has always had my name on it. I paused. I think you know this. She was very still. Her hands, folded on the table, did not move. Her face did not show what was happening behind it, but something was happening. I could see it in the very precision of her stillness, the way a person goes still when they are rapidly recalculating. Family law can be, she began. I have a family law attorney, I said, an excellent one, who has been working on this case for 4 months. Another pause, the ticking of the clock, the sound of a bird outside in the garden. I'm also aware, I said, my voice still quiet, still perfectly steady, of the document that was drafted in December, the one on Jason's laptop, the one that was dated 18 months ago but created 8 weeks ago, according to the file metadata, the one with my signature line left blank. The color left her face, all of it, all at once. She sat across from me with her hands folded and her silver hair precise and her expensive coat, and she looked, for the first time since I had known her, entirely at a loss. I watched it happen, the mechanism of it, the way 6 years of control and patience and calculation had been predicated on my not knowing. And now I knew, and the predicate was gone, and the whole structure was sitting in midair with nothing under it. That was, she began. A forgery, I said, or more precisely, a document that fraudulently represented a financial arrangement that never existed, designed to be presented in legal proceedings to stake a false claim on my property. My attorney has copies of every page and the metadata evidence establishing when it was actually created. So does the forensic accountant, who reviewed our joint finances and found the irregularities in Jason's withdrawals over the past 18 months. I said all of this very calmly, the way you read a summary of findings. I was not angry. I had been angry in November, in December. I had been angry in the sleepless hours of those months, angry in the way that feels like swallowing glass, raw and tearing. What I was now was different. What I was now was finished. "What do you want?" Eleanor said. Her voice, for the first time in 6 years, was stripped. There was no warmth in it, manufactured or otherwise. There was no tilt, no smile, no well-practiced warmth. It was just the voice of a woman who had been cornered and knew it. "Nothing from you," I said. I stood up. "That's the thing, Eleanor. I don't want anything from you. I don't want your flowers, or your Sunday dinners, or your version of my history in my own house. I want you to leave, and I want you to understand clearly that any attempt to proceed with that document or any variation of it, any attempt to contest the property settlement, any move toward a legal claim on this house, will be met with a criminal fraud referral from my attorney. The documentation is complete. The case is straightforward." I paused. I thought you should hear that from me. Directly. She stood up. She was slower than usual. The deliberate grace of her movements had gone somewhere, and what replaced it was just a woman getting to her feet in a kitchen that was not hers. She straightened her coat. She did not look at me again, not directly. She walked to the door, and I followed at a distance, and she opened it herself and stepped onto the porch, and the cold morning air came in, and she stood there for a moment with her back to me, very straight, very still. Then she went down the porch steps without turning around, and she walked to her car, and she drove away. I stood in my doorway and watched her go. The weeks that followed were not uncomplicated. Nothing in life that matters is uncomplicated, and I will not pretend that the aftermath of those months was simple or painless or satisfying in any clean, decisive way. Eleanor did not, as I had half expected her to, immediately go quiet. She called Jason. I knew this from Jason, who called me twice in the weeks after her visit, in the careful, effortful way of a man who is trying to do something right and doesn't quite know how. He told me she had contacted her own attorney. He told me the attorney had reviewed the document and told her, in the language of attorneys, that proceeding on it would be inadvisable. He told me she was angry. He told me she blamed him, and he told me this in a voice that suggested he was beginning, slowly and perhaps too late, to understand the dimensions of what he had been a part of. "I didn't know about the document," he said in one of these calls. I was quiet for a moment. "You knew she was planning something," I said. "You knew for years. You heard her in the study that day, Jason. You were in those conversations." He was quiet. "I know," he said finally. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in a very long time. Dana filed the formal notification with Eleanor's attorney in the 3rd week of March. All documentation of the fraudulent agreement had been preserved and would be submitted to the state attorney general's office in the event of any further legal action against the property. Eleanor's attorney did not respond. Eleanor did not respond. The claim, such as it had ever been, dissolved. My father came to visit in April. He is a quiet man. Richard Whitmore, 67, a retired civil engineer who has never said a great deal but has always, when he speaks, said the exact right thing. He drove up from the coast where he lives now, and he arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and I made the rye bread that Nana Ruth used to make, the recipe she had written in her small, careful handwriting and given to my mother, who had given it to me, and we ate it at the kitchen table with butter and strong tea and the garden coming into color outside the window. He asked me how I was. I told him the truth, that I was tired, and that I was also, somewhere underneath the tired, better than I had been in a long time. He nodded slowly. He looked around the kitchen, at the sage-green walls and the herb pots on the windowsill, and the yellow curtains I had hung years ago and had kept through everything. "Your grandmother would have liked this room," he said. I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been held tight for a very long time. "I know," I said. "Me too." He stayed for a week. We talked in the evenings, after dinner, on the porch in the April cool, and I told him things I had not said out loud before. Not everything, but the shape of it, the arc of a marriage that had slowly been used as the instrument of someone else's plans, the years of accommodation that had cost me something I had not known I was paying. He listened to all of it without interrupting, and when I was done, he said, "You built this house, Clara Bird, all of it. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He had not called me that in years. It was Nana Ruth's name for me in the note in the cedar box. I heard it from him, and I looked at the garden and the darkening spring sky, and I thought, I know. I do know. In May, 2 months after the divorce, 2 months after Eleanor had stood in my kitchen and gone pale, Dana called me to tell me that Jason's separate account had been addressed in the final settlement, that the $14,000 in irregular withdrawals had been factored into the asset division, and that the settlement, as executed, was complete and uncontestable. There would be no further legal proceedings. The house on Wren Street was mine, in every form the word could take. Legally, morally, practically, in every document that mattered, and in every room I moved through each morning. I had known it would end this way, or something like this way. I had built toward it with the same methodical patience I brought to every project that mattered. But knowing something is coming and feeling it arrive are two different experiences. And when Dana said those words, "The settlement is complete," I sat at my desk at the firm in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, and I let myself feel the full weight of it landing. Not triumph, not relief exactly, though there was relief in it. something quieter and larger than either. The particular piece of a person who has done what needed to be done and come out the other side with what they started with, plus something new. A knowledge of themselves, a clarity about what they will and will not accept that has no equivalent price. I went home that evening and I opened the windows, all of them, and the May air came through the house, warm and green smelling with the sound of the neighbors' oak trees moving in it. And I stood in the kitchen with my bare feet on the hardwood floors I had refinished myself, in the house I had bought myself, with my grandmother's inheritance and 8 years of my own work, and I thought about Nana Ruth's note in the cedar box, something with roots. I had roots here. I had always had roots here. No one had ever been able to take that from me, no matter how long they had tried, no matter how careful the plan. The roots had held. They were holding still. It is autumn now, 7 months after the divorce, and the oak trees on Wren Street have gone to the particular gold and rust that I have always loved most about October. I am sitting on the front porch with my coffee in the early morning, the robe on, the coffee mug warm, the garden doing its quiet autumn work of composting and going to ground, and the street is still in the 7 o'clock light, and the house behind me is entirely unambiguously mine. There have been changes. The study, which was Jason's as much as mine in the years of our marriage, is now a drafting room, a proper one, with a large table and adequate lighting, and my grandmother's cedar box on the corner of the shelf, where I see it every morning when I come into work. I painted the study walls a color called warm slate, which I deliberated over for 3 weeks, and which is, now that it is done, exactly right. The back fence that Eleanor had noted was rotting has been replaced, not because she pointed it out, but because it needed doing, and I knew how to do it, and I did it in September with a neighbor's help and a weekend of physical labor that felt, start to finish, like a form of therapy. Dana is coming for dinner on Friday. My father is coming at Christmas. The Arts Center project, the one that took over my life in the 5th year of my marriage, opened last spring, and standing in the finished building on opening day, in the light through the windows I had designed, I felt a version of the feeling I felt standing in my own house. The particular satisfaction of something built well and built to last. I think sometimes about Eleanor. Not often, and not with the consuming intensity I feared I might. She has, from what Jason has mentioned in our occasional brief communications, relocated to be nearer to her sister in another state. She and Jason are, apparently, not speaking in the way they once were. The specific dynamics of that I do not know and do not need to. What I think, when I think of her, is this. She was a person who believed that ownership could be manufactured, that the right documents and the right pressure and the right timing could transfer something that had never belonged to her. She spent 6 years working toward it with a patience and a calculation I cannot help in some way admiring for its architecture, even as I recognize what it was. She was wrong. Not just strategically, not just legally, wrong about the nature of what she was trying to take and what made it untakeable. This house is mine not because of a deed, though the deed matters. It is mine because of what it cost me, not in money, but in the specific currency of time and intention and the love of a woman who saved her whole working life so her granddaughter could have something with roots. Eleanor could never have bought what I own here. Not with any amount of planning. I finish my coffee. The morning light comes up over the oak trees and falls across the porch boards, warm and amber gold, and the garden smells of cold earth and the last of the autumn roses. And somewhere in the house behind me, the old radiator makes its familiar knock in the pipes, greeting the morning the way it has greeted every morning since I moved in, the way it will greet every morning for as long as I choose to stay. I set the empty mug on the railing. I sit for another moment, in my house, in my quiet, in the life I built and kept and intend to go on building. Then I get up and go inside to start the day. Some things have roots that no one can reach. Some things belong to you in ways that go deeper than any document. I know what mine are.